Cornelis de Hooghe, 1541. The Hague, 1583. The Hague was a 16th-century engraver and map-maker from the northern Netherlands. Biography. Cornelis de Hooghe, born in 1541 in The Hague, the Netherlands, as a bastard of Charles V. After this emperor's visit to the town in the summer of 1540, as de Hooghe's later friends and co-conspirators were to be found in the upper-class Delft families, it can safely be assumed that his mother was one of the daughters of Cornelis Arendse Z. van der Hooghe and Petronella van Persijn, wealthy and influential locals of both The Hague and Delft with close ties to the Habsburg government. This family also used names like Verhoes, de Hooghe and owned a farm in the vicinity of Delft, bearing the name de Hout. The exaggerated mention in his Hollandia map, 1565, of the rather unimportant Persijn manor, Huis te Persijn, that was situated just north of The Hague, underlines his descent from this family. De Hooghe was a pupil of Philip Gall and received his education as an engraver when Gall still lived in Haarlem. Cornelius Hoggius, as he signed his Norfolk map in 1574, already worked for himself at the court of Margaret of Parmy, his half-sister and a bastard of Charles V. 2. When Gall moved to Antwerp, he produced two maps for Margaret's court. Firstly, he made a copy of Forlani's map, La Vera Descrizione della Gallia Belgica, that by itself is assumed being a smaller copy of a wall map by Van Deventer that now has been lost. In de Hooghe's copy he added to Forlani's map the borders of Belgica, exactly as they were statuted in 1559 by the peace treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. He therefore modified the original title of the map into La Descrizione di Belgica con la sua frontiere, and added Philippi Einsblasen to the copy of Forlani. His second known work was his Hollandia map, dated 1565 and signed by his monogram C. D. H. This map is considered being his masterpiece and was ornamented by a lavish Moresquen border and the blasons of both King Philip II of Spain and of William of Orange, the Silent, by that time Stadtholder of Holland. The third noteworthy illustrations that he made for Captain Francesco de' Marchi, Margaret's most trusted aide, for his book on the construction and layout of fortifications. Several projects were severely hampered by the Antwerp uprising of 1566. After which William of Orange had to flee to Germany. This made the Hollandia map, fraternally bearing both blasons of Philip II and of William of Orange, obsolete. On May 4, 1567, a few days after Margaret settled herself and her court in Antwerp for a few months in order to restore calm in this town, de Hooghe sold his Hollandia map to the famous Antwerp printer Plantin. In 1567 his Belgica map appeared in the first edition of Ludovico Guicciardini's Descrizione di tutti I paesi bassi. It is often assumed that this map was especially made for this book, but the differences in size show that de Hooghe just sold a slightly modified and signed reprint of these maps to the author. It is safer to assume that only the second version of this map was made for Guicciardini. The first unsigned version of this map must be dated prior to 1567, most probably rather close to the year 1559 of the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis, and was made solely for use at the court. None of the existing first version maps that survived bears any sign of book binding, nor were they cut off in order to fit in Guicciardini's book. At the end of 1567 Margaret left for Italy after being replaced by the Duke of Alva. By this event, Cornelis lost his job as a court engraver and left for London. He is being mentioned on the 1567 Archbishop Grindel's list of religious refugees, Catalogus Coram, qui extitiona Philippi Hispaniarum Regis Ecclesiae Belgico Germanus e Londinensi subsunt. On May 4, 1568 Cornelis is noticed in London again, obtaining a privilege of Queen Elizabeth I. But in January 1569 he is mentioned back in Antwerp, obtaining his revenues for his Hollandia map at the Planten printing office. 1569 was also the year in which de Hooghe, together with the 18-years-old Clement Perrot, finished a calligraphical example book, the Exercitatio, which obtained a privilege and was sold by Planten's office. The lavish borders of the Exercitatio seems to find their origin in the fortification book of Captain de Marchi and were most probably incised in copper by the Antwerp engraver Amit Tavernier, since they were monogrammed data. Amit Tavernier Antwerpianis. It was de Hooghe who engraved the writing examples. He signed with Cornelis de Hooghe Bredenus Sculptet in the final print to be replaced by Cornelius de Hooghe, Sculptor Literaru. A simpler version of the Exercitatio was later made, for which Perrot and de Hooghe used the last remaining illustrative page border of de Marchi's fortification book. On this last border several geometrical and building constructors' instruments appear, clearly showing that these borders were intended to be used for the de Marchi's production, rather than as an illustration of the book on handwriting examples. In January 1570, de Hooghe was back in London. There are no indications that he returned to the Low Countries until the year of 1574, when he paid a brief visit to the Dutch towns of Hoorn and Haarlem. It is believed that de Hooghe was involved in the release of Lieven van Weldam, his distant cousin, who was taken prisoner during the Battle of the Zuiderzee, 1573. Kept in captivity in this town. During the negotiations with the local authorities he presented himself as a trader from the English coastal town of Ipswich. His mission was successful and Van Weldam was released in exchange for the Haarlem Marquise. Right after the exchange had taken place, de Hooghe received an invitation by the Haarlem magistrate for a map of Haarlem to be made, which he refused because of the low price. He then returned to Ipswich, where he worked as a trader again. Some records of shiploads and a few court cases of ill-handed transports of goods prove that he had his own trading company. It is not known when exactly he became involved in making the first Atlas of England and Wales, also known by the names of Elizabeth Atlas and Saxton Atlas. Christophorus Saxturnius. Descriptio Angliae 1579, for which he incised the first map of Norfolk, Norfolkshire Comitatus, in the year 1574. The map could have been made before and or after his stay in Hoorn and Haarlem. It was this map that was signed by Cornelius Hoggius. It is his last known work as an engraver. In 1576 de Hooghe married in Rotterdam to Marit Gen Tromper of a wealthy Rotterdam family of traders. One of the court cases indicates that Marit Gen took part in his trading firm. Around All Saints' Day of 1581, he was contacted by Philip II's envoy du Silva, one of Emperor Charles V's former chamberlains, who brought him letters of credence, confirming him as an imperial bastard. He was asked by the king to bring the dissident Netherlands back under the rule of the king. Should he succeed, then de Hooghe would become Duke of Gelre or obtain any other noble title. De Hooghe accepted the offer and started giving speeches in many cities in several parts of the Low Countries, trying to convince the people to make an end to the costly war against Spain. He became very popular amongst the pacifist Dutch Anabaptists, who even crowned him as their king. When he had written down his thoughts on paper, from which a booklet and some letters to the magistrates were to be printed and distributed, he was betrayed by the printer even before printing took place, and he was taken into custody. After a 40-day investigation, he was sentenced to death on March 29, 1583. By beheading. His body was to be quartered and to be exposed by suspending it at 4 half-gallios, at each of The four entrances of The Hague. Although de Hooghe was portrayed as a traitor of his country by later historians, especially the ones who exaggerated the 80-year struggle for independence from Spain, such as P.C. Hooft, de Hooghe portrayed himself as a man who wants to bring peace. Just before being sentenced, he spoke the words, "Must I die just because I want to bring prosperity to this country?" Quote, his support by the peaceful Anabaptists and the fact that he gave speeches and tried to persuade people and magistrates to elect him as the rightful governor of the Low Countries instead of his half-brother Philip II, who he said to dislike because of his brutality, are indications of his peaceful intentions. He seems to have played his role otherwise than intended by his half-brother Philip II, instead of using military force. Cornelis de Hooghe tried to persuade the magistrates, local guilds and individual citizens to follow him into a peaceful transition under his guidance. Because of the absence of any use of force or brutality, no shot was fired, just books written and speeches held. His death sentence can therefore be regarded as an abuse of justice, or as a political process by the Court of Holland, Hof van Holland, whose members had to lose much political influence by Cornelis de Hooghe's ideas. Smit, Jacob, 1879–1947. De aanslag van Cornelis de Hooghe op de Veiligheid van den Staat 1583 in Bijdragen voor Vaderlandse geschiedenis en oudheidkunde. Verzameld en uitgegeven door N. Japeeks. 1939. Jesman Gerards. J. Cornelis de Hooghe. 1541–1583. Keiserlijk Bastard. Cartograaf en opstandelingen. Care Threshold 2010-3 near. 29 Tijdschrift voor de geschiedenis van de cartografie. Stichting Historische Cartografie van de Nederlanden. Pag 65–70. Jesman Gerards. J. Cornelis de Hooghe. Kartenmaker en smokkelaar. In Spiegel der Zeilvaart. October 2010. Pag 28–31. Boer. Peter Christiansch. Oorsprong. Begin en vervolg der Nederlandse oorlog. Oorsprong der Nederlandse Beriten. 1679 Heruitgate van 1621. http://www.cornelidehooghe.com